Your grandfather's garden outproduced yours, and he never spent a single dollar on fertilizer, not once. Across Amish communities in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, families have been doubling and tripling harvests for over 2 centuries using 6 core soil secrets that modern garden centers would rather you forget. These aren't folk tales. These are documented, repeatable techniques, some quietly discouraged by commercial agriculture, others outright frowned upon by county extension offices that profit from selling you amendments you don't need. And then the fertilizer industry spent 70 years convincing an entire generation that healthy soil comes in a bag. Here's what they buried. Your soil already wants to feed you. It just needs to be managed the way nature designed. The Amish understood this. They kept their beds permanent. They layered compost like a blanket. They never let ground sit bare. They rotated crops with military precision, and season after season their yields made neighboring commercial farms look embarrassed. 6 of those secrets are laid out here, step by step, in plain language. No chemistry degree required, no expensive inputs, just the forgotten logic of people who had to make land perform without a hardware store down the road. By the time you reach the last one, you'll understand exactly why your grandfather's tomatoes were bigger than yours, and what you can start doing about it this weekend. The bed that never gets walked on. Picture a Lancaster County farm in the 1880s, early morning, fog still clinging to the valley floor. Rows of dark, crumbly earth stretch out behind a white clapboard farmhouse. No tractor, no rototiller, just hand tools leaning against a fence post, a draft horse standing patient in the barn, and soil that had been worked the same way for 40 years straight. The beds looked almost too simple. Narrow strips, maybe 3 feet wide, bordered by wooden planks or stone edges worn smooth from decades of use. The planks were grey with age, their grain raised by weather, their corners rounded soft from seasons of frost and thaw. Nobody stepped inside those borders. Ever. That was the first secret. And it's the one modern gardeners violate every single time they reach across a bed to grab a weed. Rototilling destroys what soil spends years building. Underground fungal networks, mycorrhizal threads thinner than a human hair, connect plant roots across entire beds, ferrying water and phosphorus in exchange for sugars. These threads are invisible to the naked eye, but under a microscope they look like white silk stretched through dark chocolate cake. A single pass with a tiller shreds those networks completely. The blades spin at hundreds of revolutions per minute, slicing through biological infrastructure that took seasons to establish. Worm tunnels, built over months of patient burrowing, vertical shafts lined with mucus that acts as a glue holding the tunnel walls open, collapse in an instant. The vertical channels that carry rainwater deep into the subsoil vanish in minutes. You've just reset the clock on years of biological construction. And you've done it in a single afternoon with a machine that cost you $400 and runs on gasoline. Old-timers didn't do this. They defined their beds once, marked the edges with boards or stakes, and never changed them. Beds stayed in the same location for decades. A farmer's grandson would plant in the exact same strip his grandfather had planted in. The soil inside those borders was never compacted by foot traffic, never inverted by a blade. Over time, the layers stratified exactly the way nature intended. Organic matter on top, dark and spongy, smelling like a forest floor after rain. Active biology in the middle, where fungal threads and bacterial colonies processed nutrients into plant-available forms. Mineral subsoil below, dense and stable, anchoring everything above it. Each layer doing its job, each layer undisturbed, each layer building on the one before it, year after year, without anyone asking it to. The width of the bed mattered too. 3 feet was the standard in most Amish communities because a person could reach the center from either side without stepping in. A woman harvesting lettuce could kneel on the path, lean forward, and her fingertips would just brush the center of the bed. Every inch of growing space stayed accessible without ever touching the soil surface. Simple geometry, profound results. The paths between beds were packed hard from use, compacted, yes, but that compaction was intentional, contained, and kept entirely outside the growing zone. The contrast between path and bed became visible within a single season. The path was firm underfoot. The bed, a few inches away, was soft enough to push a finger into without resistance. When soil isn't compacted, roots push through it with almost no resistance. You can test this yourself. Push a pencil into compacted ground and it stops after an inch. Push that same pencil into undisturbed, biologically active soil and it slides in like a knife through warm butter. Air pockets remain intact. Water drains at the right speed, not so fast that roots can't drink, not so slow that they drown. Worms move freely and pull organic matter downward, doing the tilling for you, silently, continuously, for free. The Amish didn't invent this system. They just refused to abandon it when everyone else did. Modern gardeners spend hundreds of dollars on soil amendments trying to recreate the loose, aerated texture that permanent no-till beds develop on their own over time. They buy perlite, they buy vermiculite, they buy peat moss shipped from Canadian bogs thousands of miles away. The irony is brutal. The solution was always to do less, not more. Stop walking on the beds, stop tilling, stop resetting the biology every spring. Let the soil do what soil does when you leave it alone. The Amish figured this out not through scientific study but through the simple discipline of watching what happened when they changed nothing. And what happened was that the soil kept getting better. But leaving the beds alone was only the foundation. What the Amish laid on top of those beds each spring is where the real transformation happened. The blanket that fed everything. The compost pile's humble origins would later become the exact thing that defined the entire Amish soil system. But in 1850, it was just a heap of kitchen scraps and barn waste rotting quietly behind the house. Potato peels, eggshells, apple cores gone brown, horse manure steaming in the cold morning air, straw bedding from the chicken coop. All of it piled together, turned with a pitchfork every few weeks, left to the slow alchemy of decomposition. Nobody called it a system. Nobody wrote it down. It was just what you did with the waste, because nothing on a working farm got thrown away. Every spring, without fail, Amish farmers in Holmes County, Ohio, and Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, spread a 2 to 3 inch layer of finished compost across the surface of every permanent bed. Not dug in, not tilled under, just laid on top like a blanket pulled over sleeping soil. The material was dark, almost black, crumbling between the fingers like damp coffee grounds. It smelled clean, earthy and sweet, nothing like the raw manure it had once been. They did it again in fall, after the last harvest came in. Twice a year, every year, for generations. The logic was invisible to the eye but devastating in its efficiency. Earthworms do the work of 1,000 gardeners. A single acre of healthy soil can contain over 1 million earthworms, each one pulling organic matter downward through its tunnels, digesting it, and depositing castings, some of the most nutrient-dense material on Earth, directly in the root zone. Lay compost on the surface and you are feeding that army. You are not doing the work. You are hiring the most reliable workforce in nature, and the wage is a 2-inch layer of rotted organic matter. That was only round one. The compost blanket did something else that no synthetic fertilizer can replicate. It acted as mulch simultaneously. A 2-inch layer of finished compost suppresses weed germination by blocking light. Seeds that land on the surface can't push through the dense, dark layer to reach mineral soil where they'd normally root. It holds soil moisture by slowing evaporation. On a hot July afternoon in central Pennsylvania, when the air temperature hits 95 degrees and the humidity drops below 40%, bare soil can lose a significant portion of its surface moisture within hours. Compost-covered soil holds that moisture for days. Watering frequency drops. Plant stress drops, yields climb. Elam Stoltzfus, a third-generation farmer outside of Intercourse, Pennsylvania, documented in a 1974 county agricultural survey that his family had not purchased a single bag of commercial fertilizer in over 60 years. His beds, some of which had been in continuous production since the early 1900s, were producing yields that neighboring commercial operations, using synthetic nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, could not match. His secret, when pressed, was simple. 2 inches of compost, every spring, every fall, nothing more. His hands were stained dark from working the stuff. His beds were so rich that a handful of soil, squeezed gently, would hold its shape for a moment and then crumble apart. The perfect texture that soil scientists call good tilth. Neighboring farmers who toured his operation came away shaking their heads, not because the method was complicated, but because it was so simple they couldn't believe it was the whole answer. The math on store-bought compost is punishing. A single 40-pound bag covers roughly 4 square feet at a 2-inch depth. A modest home garden of 200 square feet requires 50 bags per application. At current retail prices averaging between $8 and $12 per bag, that's $400 to $600 per application, $800 to $1,200 per year. For 2 applications, on a small garden, the bags themselves end up in a landfill. The compost inside them was likely heat processed in an industrial facility, killing much of the beneficial biology that makes compost valuable in the first place. The Amish spent nothing. Their compost piles consumed kitchen scraps, garden waste, animal manure, and fallen leaves, materials that most modern households bag and send to a landfill. The pile sat for 6 months to a year. It broke down. Thermophilic bacteria raised the internal temperature above 140 degrees, killing weed seeds and pathogens. Then it cooled. Fungal threads colonized the outer layers. It became finished compost, stable, sweet-smelling, teeming with life. It went on the beds. The cycle cost $0 and produced results that a $1,200 annual fertilizer budget couldn't touch. If you're wondering how that's even legal, so is everyone else. There is a reason commercial agriculture and garden retail chains do not promote this method. A gardener who masters on-site composting stops buying inputs entirely. That is not a customer. That is a lost revenue stream. The suppression of this knowledge is not a conspiracy. It is simply the ordinary logic of an industry that profits from dependency. Every bag of fertilizer sold is a vote for the idea that soil cannot feed itself. Every marketing campaign reinforces the myth that plants need synthetic intervention to thrive. The shelves at every garden center are organized around that myth. The products are labeled with numbers, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, as if soil were a chemistry problem with a product-shaped solution. The Amish had no such dependency. Their soil improved every single year, not because they added something expensive, because they added something free, consistently, in the right amount, in the right place, at the right time. By the late growing season, the compost layer had largely been incorporated by worm activity. The beds looked clean. The soil beneath was darker, looser, and more biologically active than the year before. If you pushed your fingers into it in August, you'd feel warmth, the heat of microbial activity, millions of organisms processing organic matter into plant food. Then fall came. Another 2 inches went down. The cycle continued. Farmers who adopted this method in the mid-20th century, including several documented in the Rhode Island Institute's early research from Amish, Pennsylvania in the 1950s, reported measurable increases in organic matter percentage within 3 years. Organic matter is the single most important indicator of soil fertility. Every 1% increase in organic matter allows soil to hold an additional 20,000 gallons of water per acre. That is not a marginal improvement, that is a transformation. The compost blanket built soil that could survive drought, resist disease, and feed plants through an entire growing season without a single additional input. It was the second layer of the system, laid directly on top of the permanent no-till beds that were never walked on, never disturbed, never reset. 2 secrets in. The soil was already performing at a level most modern gardeners never reach. But what the Amish placed on top of the compost, the third layer of the system, is where things got almost uncomfortable to explain. But this wasn't just about soil fertility anymore. The next technique touched something that modern agriculture has spent decades trying to regulate, restrict, and in some regions, quietly ban from residential use entirely. The fugitive. The garden is quiet. It is early July. The beds are loaded with tomatoes, their stems thick as a thumb, heavy with green fruit just starting to blush red at the shoulders. Squash plants sprawl outward, their broad leaves casting pools of shade. Pole beans climb twine supports, their tendrils curling tight, weeks away from peak harvest. And underneath all of it, something is happening that most gardeners never see coming. The soil is drying out. Not slowly, not gently. In the kind of summer heat that cracks clay and turns sandy loam into powder, the moisture that took weeks to build can vanish in 72 hours. You can see it happening if you know where to look. The soil surface lightens from chocolate brown to dusty tan. Hairline cracks appear between the rows. The plants don't wilt yet, but their leaves curl slightly at the edges in the afternoon, a silent distress signal that most gardeners miss until it's too late. Experienced growers know this. They've watched it happen. They've dragged hoses across scorched ground at 6 in the morning, trying to save what's left. And they've done the math on their water bills afterward, numbers that don't lie. The Amish don't run hoses at 6 in the morning. They don't have water bills, and they don't lose crops to dry spells the way their neighbors do. For generations, Lancaster County farmers, families like the Stoltzfus and Byler households whose land has been in continuous cultivation since the 1800s, have used a technique so simple it looks like laziness to an outsider. It looks like someone just threw a pile of old hay on the ground and walked away. That's almost exactly what they did. And then the soil made the one decision that changed everything. It held the water. 4 to 6 inches. That's the number. 4 to 6 inches of straw, spoiled hay, or shredded autumn leaves laid directly on top of the compost layer, blanketing every inch of exposed soil between the plants. Not a thin dusting, not a polite suggestion of coverage. A thick, heavy, deliberate layer that blocks the sun from hitting the soil surface directly. You can feel the difference with your hand. Push your fingers through the mulch on a 90-degree afternoon, and the soil beneath is cool to the touch. Damp, almost cold. Pull back the straw and you'll see white fungal threads lacing through the bottom layer where decomposition is already underway. Pill bugs curl and uncurl in the darkness beneath the mat, chewing fragments into smaller pieces. The smell is different too, not the dry, dusty smell of sun-baked earth, but something cooler and darker, like the inside of a root cellar in October. When the sun can't reach the soil can't evaporate. When the soil can't evaporate, the moisture stays locked in the root zone, exactly where the plants need it. University of California Cooperative Extension published data showing that a 4-inch organic mulch layer can reduce soil moisture loss by up to 70% during dry periods. Read that number carefully. 70%. In a drought year, that's the difference between a harvest and a funeral for your garden. In a normal dry spell, it means watering once a week instead of every single day. It means the difference between a water bill that hurts and one that barely registers. And somehow it gets worse, for anyone who's been paying for bagged mulch at the garden centre anyway. Because the Amish don't buy mulch. They never have. The sources are everywhere, and they're free. Autumn leaves, raked and shredded with a single pass of a lawnmower, pile up by the ton every October. Spoiled hay bales, the ones that got wet in the field and can't be sold as feed, are practically given away by farmers who just want them gone. A single bale, broken apart and fluffed, covers 20 to 30 square feet at the proper depth. Tree crews working utility lines or clearing lots will often deliver entire truckloads of fresh wood chips at no charge, just to avoid the cost of hauling them to a disposal site. In some communities, a single phone call to a local arborist fills a pickup truck twice over. The material arrives at your driveway. You move it to the beds. That's the entire transaction. In a single season, a family working 2,000 square feet of garden beds can source enough mulch material to cover every inch of exposed soil, at zero cost, not reduced cost, zero. But the mulch layer isn't just a water-saving trick. That's where most people stop thinking about it, and that's exactly where the Amish don't stop. Because by the end of the growing season, that 4 to 6 inch layer of straw or shredded leaves has been doing something else the entire time. It's been breaking down. Slowly, quietly, invisibly, the mulch is decomposing from the bottom up, being worked on by the same fungal networks and bacterial colonies that live in the top layer of undisturbed soil. Pill bugs curl and uncurl beneath the straw, chewing it into smaller pieces. Fungal threads, white and branching like tiny lightning bolts, bind the fragments together into a spongy mat. By October, what went down as a thick layer of dry straw in May has partially transformed into soft, dark, crumbling organic matter. It has become part of the soil. The gardener didn't add compost in September. The mulch became the compost. In the following spring, those same growers would understand exactly what this meant. The beds that carried the heaviest mulch through the summer came into the new season with measurably richer, darker, more biologically active topsoil than beds that had been left bare. The mulch hadn't just protected the soil, it had fed it, it had built it, it had done, over the course of one growing season, what would have taken years of conventional amendment to replicate. There's a reason Amish farms in Holmes County, Ohio, and Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, have been producing high yields on the same plots of land for over a century, without synthetic fertilizer inputs. The mulch layer is part of that answer. Not all of it, but a foundational piece that makes everything else possible. The beds are covered, the moisture is locked in, the soil is building itself from the top down, season after season, year after year. Up to this point, the soil had been winning. That was about to flip. Catch me if you can. The harvest is over. The last of the bean plants are pulled, their roots trailing clumps of dark earth. The squash vines are cut at the base, rolled into piles and carted to the compost heap. The beds are empty, bare soil exposed to the sky, stripped of everything that was growing there 2 weeks ago. Most gardeners look at that empty bed and see the end of the season. They cover it with a tarp. They walk away. They come back in spring and wonder why the soil looks tired, compacted, and grey, why it smells flat instead of sweet, why it crumbles into dust instead of holding together in soft aggregates. The Amish look at that same empty bed and see a deadline. There's a reason this story is still talked about today, because what happens in the window between one harvest and the next planting is not dead time. It is the most important window in the entire growing calendar, and most gardeners in the modern world have been trained by seed catalogs, by garden center displays, by the entire rhythm of commercial horticulture, to treat it as a pause, a rest, a gap between the real work. It is not a gap, it is the work. The technique is called cover cropping, and the Amish have been practicing it with a discipline that borders on obsession. The rule is simple and it is non-negotiable. The moment a spent crop comes out of the ground, a cover crop goes in. Same day if possible, same afternoon, before the sun sets on that bare soil if the seed is anywhere nearby, because every hour that soil sits exposed is an hour of moisture loss, an hour of surface crusting, an hour of erosion risk, and an hour of lost biological activity in the top layer where the most important microbial life lives. An Amish farmer standing at the end of a freshly cleared row doesn't pause to admire the work. He reaches into the seed bag hanging from his belt and starts broadcasting before his footprints have even dried. The seed mixes are specific. Winter rye combined with crimson clover is one of the most widely used combinations in traditional Amish kitchen gardens across Ohio and Pennsylvania. Oats paired with daikon radish is another. These aren't random pairings. They're engineered by generations of observation. The rye grows fast. You can almost watch it happen. Green blades pushing up through the soil surface within 4 days of sowing, and it covers the soil quickly, producing a dense root system that holds the bed together through freeze-thaw cycles. The crimson clover fixes atmospheric nitrogen directly into the soil through bacterial colonies in its root nodules. Free nitrogen, pulled from the air, deposited exactly where next season's crops will need it. The daikon radish sends a taproot straight down, sometimes 12 inches deep, punching through compaction layers that no hand tool can reach without destroying the soil structure above. When that radish root dies and decomposes over winter, it leaves behind a perfect vertical channel, a highway for water and future roots. You can see those channels in spring if you dig carefully, dark hollow tubes running straight down through the soil profile, lined with the dark residue of decomposed root tissue. Now a gardener could have stopped there. They didn't, because the roots of a well-established cover crop don't just hold the soil, they feed it. They exude sugars and carbon compounds, sticky substances called exudates that feed the fungal networks clustered around the root tips. They create channels that improve drainage and aeration. They pull up minerals from deeper soil layers, calcium, potassium, trace elements locked in the subsoil, and concentrate them near the surface where shallow-rooted vegetables can access them. A bed that sits under a cover crop for 8 to 12 weeks comes out of that period measurably more alive than it went in. Not metaphorically, measurably. Soil respiration rates, fungal hyphal density, earthworm counts, all of them increase under a properly managed cover crop. Read that again. A bed that does nothing but grow a cover crop for 2 months comes out more fertile than it went in, without adding anything, without buying anything, without doing anything except scattering seed and walking away. The economics of this are almost uncomfortable to explain. A pound of winter rye seed costs between $1 and $2 at most farm supply stores. A pound covers roughly 200 square feet of garden bed. A family working a half-acre kitchen garden, roughly 20,000 square feet of cultivated space, can cover every empty bed through the off-season for under $100 in seed. The nitrogen fixed by the clover component alone, if purchased as synthetic fertilizer, would cost several times that amount per season. The compaction relief provided by the daikon radish would require mechanical tillage equipment that costs hundreds of dollars to rent and damages the soil structure in the process. The Amish farmer pays $2 for a pound of seed. He walks the row once, broadcasting by hand, the seed arcing out in a fan from his wrist. He's done in 20 minutes. The soil does the rest. The Amish spend $2. They get back $150 worth of soil improvement, season after season, decade after decade, and the timing matters as much as the seed selection. Cover crops planted too late in the season don't establish before frost and provide minimal benefit. Cover crops left too long before termination go to seed, creating weed pressure in the following season. The window is specific. In most of the northern United States, the target planting date for a full cover crop falls between late August and mid-October, depending on the first frost date for that region. Amish growers in Zone 6, which covers most of Ohio, Pennsylvania, Indiana, and southern Michigan, target the first 2 weeks of September as the ideal window for maximum establishment before hard frost. They don't miss that window. They plan their harvest schedule around it. They pull crops early if necessary to hit the planting date. Because in their system, the cover crop is not an afterthought. It is the next crop. It is already scheduled. It is already seeded into the calendar before the summer harvest even begins. The seed is stored in a dry tin on the shelf above the workbench in the barn, labeled in pencil, ready to go the moment the bed clears. There is no scrambling. There is no forgetting. The system runs because the system is planned, and the planning happens months before the moment it matters. The beds fill in. The rye comes up thick and green within a week. The clover follows, its rounded leaves spreading low across the soil surface. The daikon pushes down, its white shoulder beginning to show above the soil line. The soil, which looked exhausted and bare 2 weeks ago, is now covered, protected, and actively building fertility for the spring planting that is already 6 months away. But what nobody saw coming was how the termination of that cover crop, the moment it gets cut and worked back into the soil, would trigger a biological chain reaction that makes the nitrogen fixing look modest by comparison. Chop it green, turn it shallow, wait 3 weeks, rotate clockwise. Watch this video to